The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We are here for Music Weekly, as we are every Sunday night at 7 o'clock Eastern on twitch.tv/NerdcastEmpire. And we've got a really good week of music this week. Really excited for not only the stuff we picked, but also when we post the full playlist, I think you'll find that a lot of really good stuff we didn't pick this week. So I think there's a little something for everyone this week as you go through the playlist. And then we are talking the music of November the 22nd this week on Music Weekly on the Nerdcast Empire. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. We are slowly but surely making it to the end of the year. What do we have? 5 full weeks left of music after this week. So
yeah.
That's pretty exciting. We'll have a pretty good picture of what was the best of 2024.
A lot of good stuff this year for sure. And I think, and we'll talk more about this kind of when we get to a best of, if we do something like that, where we have a best of podcast, is we just not really realizing how much good stuff there was out there that we just were not made aware of. You really have to go out and find this good music, because if you don't search for it, you're just never going to see it, because it's just not played on the radio. It's not on even things like Spotify. When you set your channels, I feel like some of these groups should be a logical choice for that, but sometimes it's kind of hard to even find them there.
Yeah, you kind of feel like the algorithms are not quite living up to what they should be.
I feel like maybe, in the early days when you were discovering a lot of these groups from overseas, the algorithm did a better job of throwing more stuff at you that maybe was not on the radio. And now it feels like somebody at a radio level, at an executive level, decided, no, we need to make sure we're hearing all these American groups, that play on the radio all the time. That's what you need on your Spotify instead. But that's just the way it goes. But that's what we're here for. We're here to do our research to bring you the best music from all across the world, and we have a very good selection coming up this week. We've got some news items to take care of before we get to the music this week, and I think the biggest news item in rock and metal, and I can't say it's a huge shock, but certainly something that's noteworthy. The news that Nico McBrain has retired, basically, I don't want to say suddenly, but it was announced at their concert over the weekend, and a replacement already in place. That's what you see the story there, kind of tells both sides of it. Simon Dawson, a former session drummer and a longtime bandmate of Steve Harris with British Lion, is going to be the replacement. McBrain has been through a lot health-wise, and so... And he's been with the band for 42 years. So this is not a situation where he's leaving with any ill will. In fact, he's going to be continuing on with projects that are involved with the band. It's just he's not going to be on the road full time anymore. And considering everything he's been through, you kind of totally understand that. But the news did kind of come out of nowhere. So I think a lot of people were a little surprised that there wasn't more of a hey, farewell tour. I'm going to retire at the end of the next 20 shows, so kind of do a farewell. This was just nope, I'm done. This is it, and on they go. So I think that's kind of the only surprising part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, 42 years. This guy has been the drummer for Iron Maiden for my entire life, quite literally.
Almost my entire life as well.
I mean, that's incredible. I think I saw on Wikipedia he's been active in music since 1966.
Wow,
the guy has been around. I think if more musicians were honest with themselves, this is probably how it would play out more often than not, where you have no desire to stop until one day you're I just can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think at that age and with that many years, one of the three most tenured members of Iron Maiden up to this point, there's nothing wrong with just waking up and saying, I don't want to do this insane touring anymore. I want to still be a part of the band. I want to be included, but I just, my body's been through a lot. It's totally natural to say, I'm going to step aside and work on some other areas within the band.
And of course, he suffered a stroke back in January of 2023, had some paralysis that he had to work through. And obviously, when you're a drummer,
that's a big deal.
That's kind of a big deal. And, obviously, the miles that they put on in a band are way more than anything I will ever do in my life. But I kind of equate it at a smaller scale. I covered high school sports for 20, 25 years, and there just came a point a couple years ago when I started doing more of the broadcasting stuff where I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. No offense to the high school kids, no offense to the awesome people that I worked with over those years. You just, it's a Friday night and you're driving out on these country roads in the middle of nowhere in the snow in the dead of winter to make a few bucks covering a high school game. And you just think, I don't want to do that anymore. And it was not a gradual thing with me either. It was just kind of like, this is it. Like, we're not going to go down that road anymore. As much as, it's not like I don't like high school sports. Still love high school football. I think it's really a lot of fun, but it's just at some point your priorities change. And for him, God love him, he made it 42 years before he just decided, I don't want to be on the road anymore. Maybe can't be on the road. It might even be a situation where, like you said, his body just told him, like, man, this is it. Like, you just can't. And of course, a lot of these bands, had to kind of go through everything with the pandemic and all the regulations that were probably involved with touring internationally during that time. On top of the fact that a lot of these guys that have been on the road for 30, 35, 40 years probably got a lot more time at home in 2020 than they had. And when you get a bunch of time at home, you start to realize that that's pretty nice. And maybe I don't want to be going right back out on the road again. And he obviously did for another 3 or 4 years. But like I said, it's really more that it just kind of happened. Obviously, the fact that they already had the replacement lined up, it's not like I don't think the band was totally surprised by this, but I think the fan base might have been a little surprised that it was just like, this is it. I'm done. See you guys later.
That is the one benefit of having side projects with the members of your band is that, you kind of have people lined up should something like this occur. It's like, I've been playing in my side band over here since 2012, and I have a drummer if we need him. And certainly Steve Harris is kind of the mastermind of the band for the most part. So, if he has someone lined up, you're going to run with it. I just think, like, imagine the story you told about not wanting to cover high school sports. It's like that's one thing when you're in your early to mid 40s. This guy's 72.
Oh yeah, like
to make it that long and then be like, okay, now I'm done. That's
that it's wild, honestly, that he just continued on. But I think when you get to that age too, and we've seen it over the years in other industries, you do also kind of run into the fear that if I stop doing this, what is left for me life-wise? Like, so often you see these guys that do something for 40, 45 years and then they retire and then they're dead 6 months later because they just kind of lose the reason to go on. So I think there's also that fear in the back of your mind too. And I think the fact that he does have all these side projects lined up and is going to stay busy with that kind of stuff almost makes it easier to say, hey, I still have a lot of things going on, so I'm going to stay busy, but I'm just not going to be getting on a plane every day or every other day traveling to a different corner of the world and just stressing my body out.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we all hope we find something to do that you're stepping away at 72 because the wheels come off, not because you just hate it.
Yeah.
Like, there's something to be said for, it isn't the love of his gig that is taking him out of it. It's purely, he's been doing this forever, and it's time for a break.
Yeah, for sure. But obviously a legend, and it's great that he's getting to do this on his own terms and not because of another major health issue. It's great that the band's going to be able to kind of honor him and keep working with him, but also continue to do what they want to do, which is amazingly to continue to tour, because it's not like they're not all in that same boat where they've been on the road for a long time. So it's kind of cool that they still want to do it, and there are still people who probably see Iron Maiden. I mean, I still haven't seen Iron Maiden in concert.
I still need to, for sure.
It's like there are still so many rock and metal fans that are seeing them for the first time and being blown away by those guys, and they've been at it for almost half a century.
I mean, Steve Harris is 68, Bruce Dickinson's 66, so next opportunity you have to see Iron Maiden, you might want to jump on it.
Probably a good time to do that, but we wish him the best in retirement and whatever side projects he has. We certainly look forward to that, and just really interesting news for sure from Iron Maiden and Nico McBrain, who's decided to step down and retire after 42 years. Some other news, and Blabbermouth is always good for these, I don't want to say clickbait headlines, but sometimes they do feel a little rage bait. And this is kind of another one. It's an interview with David Ellison that basically talks about him saying, the headline says, "Rock is dead in America." I know people will lambast me for saying that, but it is. And it's kind of echoing what Gene Simmons had said in a previous interview not too long ago. And it's interesting because, I see a couple different sides to it. I do feel like there are definitely a lot of great American rock bands that we didn't know about till we started doing this podcast. So I think maybe it's not dead in America. Maybe it's just harder to find. You have to actually look for it because it's not in front of your face like it is in other places in the world. But that's the other side to it too, is so many of these rock and roll acts are touring Europe and playing sold out festival type events all across Europe, playing the Far East, playing Japan. And I think there's probably some lament from some of these guys that why can't it be this popular here?
Yeah. Why do I have to go to the ends of the earth to play in front of sold out stadiums?
And, the best example, and before I get Mike's thoughts on it, the best example for us is Sonata Arctica, who we have seen a couple different occasions. And each time it's been in front of a pretty small relative crowd in Louisville or in Columbus.
The place in Louisville was basically a pool hall.
It was, and it wasn't full.
No.
And it's a shame because they put on an amazing show, and it's a shame that they're not playing venues like Riverbend or bigger, and they're just completely sold out. And I think that's where these comments come from. That you just feel like, why is it that the U.S. has abandoned rock and metal, and these guys have to basically fly their wares overseas to make the kind of money they need to make to keep going?
Yeah, it kind of feels like the industry in terms of rock and roll here in the United States is just at the point now where they're reaping what they've sowed for a while, where they've de-emphasized rock music to such a degree that no kid grows up wanting to be a rock star anymore. That's just so not on people's minds. And I think the music industry over here has gone so far the other direction to where it's, people don't admire virtuosic performances anymore. It's how can I create music the simplest way? Maybe I don't have to be overly musically literate. What can I do to get a sound out there of some shape or form? And I think it's unfortunate, but it kind of goes back to the Marty Friedman article we did a week ago, where he talked about kind of the Japanese embrace of hard music, where I don't think we've ever allowed that to happen here in the United States. And as a result, it's kind of gone by the wayside.
And the other thing I'll say, too, that to defend the United States a little bit in this argument is when you're comparing the United States and its size and the number of people to a small European country.
A lot more, less populous, but more densely populated.
Yes. It's a little bit misleading because there are so many more people here, which means there's so many other things to do, and there's different branches to go towards. So it's not like there aren't rock and metal fans in the U.S., and there's not bands that are doing wonderful things, especially new bands. But it can be a lot harder to find them because they're so spread out, or they're, there's not that centralized small area. I mean, it'd be different if the U.S. was the size of Ohio. It'd be like, well, we know we can find. We'll go to Columbus. We'll go to Cincinnati. We'll find these bands.
Well, if the farthest we had to ever go for a concert was Chicago, that would be fine. We would make do if that's what it took to see our favorite bands. And for some countries, that's really about one side to the other for them. So, it's definitely that too. And I think for an aging rock star, the other thing to consider is just the industry's dead.
Yeah.
The industry is so different now where it's not even just rock music may not be popular over here. It's hard to make money as a new band either way.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're playing.
It's like, you hope that you can get on a streaming service and you make a little bit of money and start your local touring and, hopefully it takes off and people find you, but if it doesn't, then you're constantly doing this as a side project and not getting a chance to actually do it for a passion project. And that feels like something you should be able to do here a little easier because there's so many people, because there's so many opportunities. And it feels like that just isn't the case and people have to go overseas.
I also think too that technology has kind of neutered rock stars. I think if you had to discover the Beatles through Spotify and Bandcamp, they wouldn't have had the admiration that they had from the general population.
Mm-hmm.
People wouldn't have cared about them. They might have liked the music, but they themselves wouldn't have been rock stars. I think there's a certain element you miss when your first experience isn't on television or live. I think you can't. It makes it a little more difficult for these people to get over in that same way.
Well, let's be real. I mean, how many bands did we discover in the 90s from MTV or, TRL or VH1 or, just even though they still played probably more pop music than rock music, you could still find rock bands and discover them and hear their current stuff on television. And of course, that gets back to the whole discussion of, cable TV isn't what it was then, where we might have had 30 or 40 channels, so you would find it. Like now, there's 6,000 channels, and 590,000 of them are playing like QVC, or selling some sort of nonsense. Like it's just, it's obviously a different world, and you hate that they talk about it being dead because, like I said, there are a lot of great American bands. In fact, we're going to talk about a band that's an American band this week, and it's just, I don't know how it would change. I more programs like ours to make it big, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Like,
it's kind of funny because, later we're going to talk about the year 2007.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're kind of reaching the tail end of you going through the list of releases and remembering music videos that corresponded to them.
Yeah.
I remember Avenged Sevenfold having videos for, Afterlife and Critical Acclaim. And, I just don't know how many more albums we're going to have and how many years until I'm like, okay, I don't remember there being music videos for any of these.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, I think that's the reality of it is there was a lot of these bands, as we found, as you've done this playlist every week, have music videos, but you've had to find them. Like
who shows those?
Right.
Where do you go?
YouTube.
Basically, yeah.
That's it. Or I'm sure
but no one's curating that and throwing it in front of you like we had in the 90s and early to mid 2000s.
Yeah, and it's a shame, really. But like I said, we'll continue to do our part, and hopefully, again, when bands tour, please go see them live. That's the best way to support them. Buy their albums, buy their merch, do what you can to support them live, and because they just can't make a living off of Spotify and YouTube streams. Like you got to help them out, and that's what we continue to promote here on our podcast. One other news story this week, and this one's an interesting one just because we've been talking. We just spent some time talking about another festival last week, but this one seems to be good news that the previous owners of Rocklahoma, along with the Born and Raised Music Festival, have purchased or acquired the convention back, or the concert back, the festival, if you will.
We spent so much time talking conventions.
Yeah, for sure. And it was previously purchased by Danny Wimmer Presents, which that company, DWP, actually does a lot of festivals, including Sonic Temple, which we talk a lot about in Columbus, Ohio. And couldn't really find anything like grossly negative about them. There were a few kind of nitpicks here and there, but this move with the original people, the Prior Creek Music Festivals group, reacquiring these festivals was met with a lot of excitement on their Facebook page and everything else. People are super excited. These people have decided to reacquire these festivals.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I read this article, I had a few thoughts. First off, who is this Danny Wimmer Presents? And that led me to look up the other festivals that they run, which, I mean, like you mentioned, Sonic Temple, you have Aftershock in Sacramento, Carolina Rebellion, you have Louder Than Life in Louisville, I think I even saw Incarceration as one that they run
Yeah.
as well, which is here in Ohio. But yeah, just a ton of festivals, really big deal. And I then kind of went to the Facebook of Rocklahoma so I could read some of the response to this original group, the Prior Creek Music Festival, is taking back over. And yeah, a lot of people were talking about how this past Rocklahoma in 2024 wasn't quite the same. They like camping seems to be a really big element to it, and I think there were some issues with that too. But yeah, the majority response has been really positive. I then went and was looking at the lineups from this year compared to prior years, just to see if maybe there was like some sort of drop off there, and I really didn't see anything in line with that. So it doesn't seem like this could possibly be negative in any way, shape, or form.
The only thing I saw online about DWP that some people had complained about is that maybe the vendor prices were a little higher with them, so some of the smaller vendors were either getting squeezed out or having their margins reduced a little bit. And that can come from this other group, maybe family owned or whatever the situation is. They're clearly from the area.
Yeah.
It meant a lot to them, so there were probably vendors that had worked with them for many, many years that might have been getting a good deal, and the other guys came in and may have just been charging market rate. Like, they weren't trying to rip anybody off. It's just like, well, this is what we do at these other festivals, so we're going to do this here. And, I think there is something to be said for having a lot of different people owning these festivals. So you have some sort of variety in the festival, that it's not all this. We talk about it a lot in the anime space. We talked about, same groups running multiple conventions, and you start looking at their lineups and they're the same people coming to all of them. It's like, I would gladly go to 5 different conventions you own, but if it's the same guests are going to be there, there's no real point in me doing that. Same thing with these festivals. Like, I remember Eddie Trunk going out to Rocklahoma and like hosting and doing stuff there. And, if you're going to take the time to fly out to Oklahoma to go to the festival, you want it to be a little different than another festival that you might have gone to. So to me, it seems like a real positive situation.
Yeah, I think every festival needs its own identity. I think that's important to differentiate yourself from all the other ones in the market, because, you might plan on going to 2 or 3 a year and that's it. So you need to both stand out, but also differentiate yourself in a way that entices enough and a wide variety of people. What was the other thing I was going to mention? Oh, talking about Sick New World, which was canceled. We talked about that a week or so ago. I just wonder, when you have this Danny Wimmer group running all these other festivals, when it comes to maybe overcharging for certain things, I think, they're probably trying to play it safe too, so they don't have to sell out just to make it a success.
Sure.
I mean, Sick New World, they made it sound like they basically had to near sell out or sell out just to make a profit. And you can't run those thin of margins and it not eventually bite you.
Well, and I think that's the other thing, and we could get into a long discussion about this, but, I think this, in theory, should be better for the bands as well, because if one company owns all these festivals, then it's hard to have any leverage as a band to say, hey, you need to pay us this amount of money to come to this festival. And they'll be like, well, no, we don't, because we run all the festivals. So you either come for this amount of money or you don't come at all. And then that causes a whole chain reaction of problems where bands can't make these festivals. And we talked last week about how certain bands really kind of pin their whole tour.
It was like the anchor of their tour that they had.
So, I think that's really important that there's still other groups out there. So congrats to the folks in Oklahoma. Sounds like they're really excited about that. And certainly there'll be more news on Rocklahoma as we get a little closer to the 2025 date, as they're still working out lineups and such. But interesting story popped up, and certainly good news for those people as well. So those are our news items for this week. Just a reminder, we got a website, nerdcastempire.com. You can check out our store while you're there. You can pick up merch. You can check out previous episodes of the Nerdcast Empire. This is number 118, episode number 43 of Music Weekly. A reminder that we'll play music clips on our Twitch page, live, and on the VOD, and on our YouTube page. If you're listening on a podcast network, which you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, you won't hear the music clips. We will talk about the bands, though, so you'll be able to come back. We always encourage you to get here live. We'll also encourage you to go check out Mike's playlist, and I'll post that in just a moment. that has all of the music for each week. So you're able to go through and pick the bands you like. And also you can go over and check out his YouTube page, which has a bunch of other stuff on there, including different anime playlists and things like that. When we talk about the opens and ends there. A reminder, too, we're on a lot of different social media at Nerdcast Empire. We've been posting shorts of our podcasts, basically the bands that we're choosing every week. You can see them on TikTok. You can see them on Facebook and Instagram. You can see them on YouTube as well. It's all out there. Got a lot of content. Please feel free to share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Smash that like button, all that good stuff. We really appreciate it. Again, we're working our way toward 50 followers on Twitch, so please tell a buddy, tell a friend, buy, sell, trade, all that good stuff. Join us on Twitch so we can continue to grow our podcast into 2025. With all that said, sales pitch done. It's time to get to this week's music. Of course, we're talking the music of November the 22nd, which means I will post Mike's playlist here, and that playlist is created when Mike goes through and pulls a couple of different sources worth of album releases for a given week. He will then go through and pull a track off of as many of those albums as he can find, put them in a playlist. We go through them. We each pick 2 new bands or 2 new albums from bands that we will spotlight on the podcast. And then the final segment of the show, we will go into the vault where we'll each talk about a classic album you need to check out. Mike is going through the glam bands right now that are listed according to Wikipedia, and I'm going through the years. We are almost done with that as we are up to 2007 this week, so we'll get to that in the last segment of the show. With all that said, it's time to get to the music. This is a really good week, and there's stuff that we did not pick this week that on a normal week or maybe a light week, we absolutely would have picked. So definitely encourage you to check out the playlist. I think you'll find something you like even. Obviously, we think you'll like these 4 bands we chose, but I think there's other stuff you're going to like as well. So with that said, it's time to get to our new music of the week. So we'll start with Mike, as we always do. You've got 2 picks. What is pick number 1 for you?
Yeah, so this first one stood out to me pretty quickly, and I wasn't totally sure why at first until I did a little research into who's involved. But my first pick is the first offering from the Italian heavy metal band. The band is Die For My Sins, and their album is called Scream.
Well, I can't say that I'm shocked that we're going to Italy. We have spent some time there over the years. I believe they've already shouted us out or commented on our post on Facebook as well. So if any of them are listening,
very cool.
Welcome. But tell us about Die For My Sins.
Yes, this band was founded in 2022 by Italian brothers Fabio and Nicholas Calori. They are the guitarist and drummer from the power metal band Heimdall. On the album, Fabio plays guitars, bass, and keyboards while Nicholas handles drumming. So what caught my attention was that I noticed Ralph Sheepers was singing on the song that I was listening to. And, I know him as the lead singer from the band Primal Fear, great power metal band in their own right. And he was also a former vocalist of Kai Hansen's band Gamma Ray. He does all the vocals with the exception of one track, Shades of Grey, which features Ian Perry on vocals. He's the former vocalist of the band Elegy. Has a bunch of solo work, including a project called Ian Perry's Rock Emporium, which is a tremendous name.
It is.
He does a great job too. But as far as if you enjoy any kind of power metal, or specifically bands like Halloween, or bands that Sheepers has been involved with, Gamma Ray, Primal Fear, there's nothing about this you won't enjoy. It is just solid rock, not epic power metal, but power metal with really strong vocals. Standout tracks include the song Scream, Still Alive, Waiting for Your Hero, and The Sign of the Cross, Shades of Grey. And as mentioned, the title track, which is the one I picked out to listen, the song Scream, really cool, and check it out.
So we're going to check that out now. This is Die For My Sins, the first track, the title track as well, off of this album Scream. It is Scream, so let's check a little bit of that out now. Another one with a really good mix that we picked up once we put these headphones on.
Yeah.
Really enjoy that. And yeah, I mean, this is really up the alley of this podcast. Not a shock to see this one get the pick this week. And, we've got a couple of power metal acts on the list this week on our selections. And it's fast and it's hard, but it's not over the top, which is kind of the best power metal, where it's not comically power metal, where it's almost like just way, way, way too much. Like this is right down the alley of what you need to do. It's the vocals are great all the way through. It's just a great power metal album for sure, and excited to see what these guys do as they continue to go forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. This week is a very good example of just all the varieties of power metal out there. I feel like the music that was released for this week just touches on so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Both the bands I picked are really power metal bands, but you wouldn't mistake one for the other. They have a very different approach and very different vocals, which I think kind of make both bands for me. That being said, pick number 2 for me is the second full-length album from this band from Essex, England. They are a symphonic power metal band. They are named Fellowship, and the album is The Skies Above Eternity.
Yeah, and I would say, even compared to the first band that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes, that's also power metal, they're even different than these two as well, but they all kind of take elements of it and really use it to their advantage, and this was one that was definitely on my radar as well this week. Really good stuff from these guys.
Yeah, I think, if the prior band you'd compare to bands like a Halloween, these guys aren't quite that same. They're almost more like toward the Blind Guardian side of power metal, which is obviously totally fine too.
Sure.
This band is made up of Matthew Corey on vocals, Sam Brown and Brad Wasco handling guitars, Ed Munson on bass, and Callum Tuffin on drums. They remind me of the band Serenity, an Austrian power metal band who the vocal styles of both are pretty similar. Serenity's been around. They released their debut album back in 2007. But while they kind of sing more about historical events, this band sings more about kind of self-affirmation and positivity. Like, so much of their album just makes you feel really good. It's impossible to listen to it and not feel better about yourself as a result. The standout tracks on the album include Hold Up Your Hearts Again, Victim, The Bitter Winds, Eternity, A New Hope, and the song that I picked to listen to is the one I first mentioned, Hold Up Your Hearts Again.
I know the Angry Metal guy certainly was very high on this song as well.
Yeah, his review was interesting because he kind of prefaced it with, if this band never released another album, that'd be fine. And then he kind of goes into the concerns that they wouldn't be able to live up to the first album, and as a result, he's like, so what did they do? Well, they started this new album with the best power metal song of the year. So, and yeah, this song is great. I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, let's listen to a little bit of it. Again, this is Fellowship off of their new album, The Skies Above Eternity. This is the opening track to that album, Hold Up Your Hearts Again. So let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, you remember how I said the last band wasn't really over the top? Like, this is definitely much more over the top, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I definitely hear the comparison to Blind Guardian, not necessarily in how it sounds like vocally, but the speed, the vibe you get from the music is very much on that end of the spectrum. But it's really good, and the track you put on the playlist was like, okay, this could be a really, really good album. And before I got a chance to go back and listen to the whole thing, you had picked it, which I think one of us was definitely going to pick this one because it is really, really good, and I'm kind of excited to go back and check the whole thing out. But
yeah, I strongly recommend it. It's funny, I don't want to besmirch Ralph Sheepers because I think he's a tremendous power metal vocalist. But I feel like Matthew Corey here is just a good singer.
Yeah.
Like, I think his voice would lend itself to other styles of music, and it would still come off really well.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with a singer who's just really good at one type of vocals. And there's also nothing wrong with a guy who you feel like could do a bunch of different types of vocals. I think that's,
And not to suggest that Sheepers couldn't do other types, but when I hear his voice, to me, that's just a metal voice.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, he's obviously really good as well. But definitely check those guys out. Fellowship. Both of those picks, really good. And if you're into power metal, regardless of what end of the spectrum, I think you're going to find something in both of those acts that you're going to enjoy. And if not, I've got a third one for you because we're going to start out with some power metal of my own as well. We're going to start out with the first pick this week. This is a heavy / power metal band out of Nice, France. This is Kingcrown with the album Nova Atlantis. This is their third full-length album as Kingcrown. They were also known as Oblivion from 2015 to 2018. Only released one album under that name in 2018. It's funny, one review mentioned the band was influenced by Iron Maiden, Gamma Ray, Symphony X, Master Plan, and Halloween. You're going to probably hear some influences when you hear their music. Because
good place to start.
That's a good place to start if you're going to be into power metal. That's a good list. Frontman Joe Amore, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, who also sang for the French power metal band Nightmare.
Enzo's brother, probably.
Really stands out on this album, but also their guitars. I mean, it really is. It may not be quite as over the top as Fellowship, but it's the power of the guitars really comes in, especially between the chorus and the next verse. You'll hear a little bit of it, I think, in the clip, but it's just a really good power metal album. I've really enjoyed this from beginning to end. There are some standout tracks, The Magic Stone, Realer Fantasy, Judgment Day, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is the title track to this album, Nova Atlantis. So let's check these guys out. This is Kingcrown with their third full-length album, Nova Atlantis, and this is the title track to that album. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. But yeah, I mean, just another example of power metal that probably falls somewhere in between where your bands were. But like I said, I thought it was a really enjoyable album. Your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, I could definitely hear some Gamma Ray there in the vocals for one. They kind of have that mix between a Ralph Sheepers and a Kai Hansen thing going on, which is really cool. This week we had a lot of really strong bands, and this is certainly one of them. I do wonder if having this on my playlist is what's led me to have some YouTube recommendations talking about the location of Atlantis. Evidently, it's in Africa. There's this in the Sahara. There's this weird formation, like the circular Earth formation that evidently might be Atlantis. It's kind of wild, but it's fun to watch videos about it.
Sure. You never know what kind of recommendations you're going to get between this podcast and everything else you watch. It's definitely an interesting.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
But definitely check those guys out. Really enjoyed that. Kingcrown, good stuff coming out of France for power metal. But it would not be my picks if I didn't at least get one AOR band in here. So we are going to wrap up my picks for this week with another Frontiers band. I had two of them on the list this week. We are going to go with the second one on the list. This is the American AOR melodic rock band, Sunstorm, with Restless Flight. This is their 8th full-length album. The band was started originally featuring Jolynn Turner on vocals, who we talk about a lot on this podcast. But this album, they really had a big switch in the lineup. Aldo Lonoble taking over on guitars, Andrea Cangeli taking over on bass, Antonio Agate taking over on for Alessandro Del Vecchio on keyboards, and Alfonso Moserino taking over on drums. All new except for the vocalist. It's the third album featuring Ronnie Romero on vocals, who took over for Turner after he did the first 5 albums. Ronnie Romero is great, obviously, as well, so you know what you're getting with this album. It's a great AOR album. Also a great cover of Shot in the Dark on this album, which I was a little surprised to hear start playing while I had it on in the background, but they did a really good job with it, so definitely worth checking out. Other standout tracks besides the cover of Shot in the Dark was Love's Not Gone, Hope's Last Stand, Restless Fight, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is I'll Stand For You. So let's check these guys out. This is Sunstorm with Restless Fight, and this is the title track to that, or not the title track, the leadoff track to this album, I'll Stand For You. So let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Through the battles we fought and the victories we have won, I'll stand for you. Through the darkest night, burning like a beacon of guiding light, I'll stand for you. A love will ring so true. I stand for you. Through the darkest night, burning like a beacon of guiding light, I'll stand for you. A love will ring so true. Forever and always I'll stand for you. As the curtain falls on the screen.
I do want to make that clear. It is Restless Fight. I mistyped when I was typing my notes, but yeah, I mean it's great AOR. It's exactly what you would expect out of a band that's fronted by Ronnie Romero. The whole album is just a really easy listen, but just some great rock and roll, melodic rock, and good way to kind of round out our picks for this week that was mostly power metal. But your thoughts on these guys, Mike?
Yeah, just another instance of Frontiers releasing something that there's no way to not enjoy it at some level. Like there's no negative to it. There's nothing bad about it. It's even if you're more into metal, there's just something ear pleasing about the AOR hard rock that comes out of Frontiers. I had to check to see if Sunstorm was going to be at the Frontiers Festival for next year. I don't see them listed, but Ronnie Romero is going to be there, so
Probably get some Sunstorm.
yeah,
then.
I mean, next best thing, and I imagine they're probably still announcing guests at this point. So, yeah, that's something I wish would come to the States.
Yeah, I would absolutely. I don't care where you put it in the States. I will get on a plane. I will go watch that.
You have Asia headlining one night, Winger another night. I mean, come on.
That sounds awesome. I do have a passport. I could go there, but the budget's
True.
a little thin at the moment, so we will not be doing that. But yeah, definitely check those guys out. Sunstorm, really enjoyed that. Restless Fight, their new album, number 8 for them, and that is going to wrap up the new music this week. It is time to get to the vault, where we are going to give you a couple classic albums you need to check out. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Mike has been going through the Wikipedia list of glam bands and going A to Z to try to find some hidden gems, if you will. Obviously, there are a lot of really obvious picks, but we've tried to avoid those to some extent because we're going to talk about those kind of bands all the time on this podcast. But you are up to the letter P, I believe, this week. So we are making some good progress. And what do you have for us in the vault?
You know, when I look at the list each week for the letter that I'm on, there's kind of 3 camps. There's like the obvious one that I don't want to pick. There are the weeks where there is no obvious or middle road one. There's just the obscure, and I have to settle with that. But this week, there was kind of stuff in all 3 categories. You have the obvious, the I've heard of them, but I'm not super familiar with, and I've never heard of them. With that in mind, I went with a band out of that middle group, the bands that I'm aware of. I don't own any of their albums. I'm not super knowledgeable about them. So that being said, I ended up going with the 3rd studio album from the Danish hard rock band Pretty Maids. The album came out in 1990 called Jump the Gun.
Yeah, and should be noted, Pretty Maids evidently still is and not a was on Wikipedia, and they did have a Facebook page, so I tagged them in our post. So it's always great to see any of these vault picks still around and getting stuff done.
Yeah, still out there doing it, and still have two of the founding members, Ronnie Adkins and Ken Hammer on guitars, Adkins being the vocalist. Band was formed in 1981 by those people I just mentioned. They're the only two original members left, but again, for a band that's been around for 41 years, that's certainly not a bad thing. This album was released on April 20th, 1990 in Europe. In the U.S., and I didn't see why this was the case, but for whatever reason in the United States, the album was not called Jump the Gun. The title was changed to Lethal Heroes. Both are tracks on the album, so fine. To me, like, Lethal Heroes almost sounds worse as far as, like, if you were looking to offend somebody than Jump the Gun. Do
they just think it was a better track? So they're like, well, this is going to play in America, so we want to call it that because we think this track is stronger in the U.S. I don't know.
That's unfortunately, I did not see what the logic was behind that. But kind of looking at the band, Ronnie Adkins, I'm pretty familiar with him on top of just having been in this band. He's also guest performed on numerous Avantasia albums. 2013's The Mystery of Time, 2016 Ghost Lights, 2019 Moonglow, and up until sometime next year, the most recent, as of now, the 2022 album, A Paranormal Evening with the Moonflower Society. Crazy name. But we could talk about Avantasia plenty because they're certainly in the news right now as well.
Yeah.
Also kind of wild that Ronnie Adkins has had 2 bouts with lung cancer. In 2019, went through treatment and was cancer-free. Came back in 2021, this time stage 4. But he's still outperforming. I don't know how his treatment is going on that. But, looking at his Facebook, like, he did a live show, I think, just yesterday. So clearly still getting the work done. This album was produced by Deep Purple's bassist, Roger Glover. And according to the Wikipedia page on the album, was at the time the most expensive recording ever made in Denmark. Oddly enough.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The cover art's pretty wild. It looks like some sort of combination of what could be a Journey album cover and maybe the final boss in a Japanese role-playing game. Like, it's wild. Sadly, the album underperformed commercially and led to the rest of the members of the band ultimately leaving only Ken Hammer and Ronnie Adkins left. The band went on to blame Glover for the album's failure, basically saying that his involvement led to what was an overproduced sound on the album. And Ronnie Adkins in 2014 referred to this album as his least favorite. Another odd side note, there's a song on the album, Hang Tough, that was originally written and recorded for Icon's album, Night of the Crime, which is a former vault pick of mine as well, but ultimately wasn't used. My knowledge of the album was basically just from the song Young Blood, which I'd heard numerous times in the past, and after listening to the entire album, I can kind of conclude that it is the best song on the album. That being said, I mean, the album does have a lot of polish, but I still enjoyed it. It did at times, for something that came out in 1990, feel a bit dated. Like, if you told me it would, some of those tracks were written and recorded in 1982, I could probably buy that. Standout tracks on the album include Lethal Heroes, Rock the House, Young Blood, Jump the Gun, Hang Tough, and Over and Out. Even though Ronnie Adkins thinks this is his least favorite album, overall I thought it was still pretty good. I think nothing really to complain about.
Well, you mentioned wondering if the tracks were written in 1982. The Wikipedia page says that, Hang Tough was included on Icon's version, or Icon's version is included on their 1984 live bootleg CD and DVD. Yeah. So that song's
been around a while.
That song had been around a while, so it does make you wonder if some of the other ones had kind of been sitting around and just took a little while to get the album to market, because if it costs that much to make, it probably took a while to make, because typically, especially in that era, when you're talking about costs, it generally involves studio time and, engineering time and stuff like that. And those things not only were expensive in 1990, still expensive, but less so today, but also just takes time. So you just have to think there's something to that. But yeah, I've not had the chance to listen to this yet, but my guess is it's going to be pretty solid. And, again, just another group that you just wonder why they weren't a little bit bigger, because again, 1990, still plenty of time for a group like this to hit. Yeah. And the fact that, even though you can question why they changed the album name in the U.S. The fact they went to the trouble of changing the name makes you think that somebody at Epic Records thought this was going to hit, because otherwise, why would you care? Just name it the same thing, just shove it out there and see if anybody buys it. So,
and I wonder too, and I could look back and kind of see what was released around that time. Was there an album similarly titled that they didn't
Could
want?
be.
They didn't want to look like they were ripping it off or something. It makes you wonder, but yeah, kind of looking back at their history, their prior album from 1987, produced by Eddie Kramer and Flemming Rasmussen actually did some mixing on it, and he's kind of known for being the producer on some of the older Metallica albums. That's kind of interesting, but I have to assume as a result there was a bit of a departure when you bring in Roger Glover to produce the 1990 album.
Yeah, I don't know why, what the decision-making process was, what they were going for there. Maybe they wanted something that was a little more polished.
And Deep Purple's great, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they brought in some hack. They brought in a guy that clearly knows what he's doing. But,
yeah.
At the same time, might not have been what the band was looking for in an end result, which also could have been why it was so expensive. How many times did they mix and remix and, no, we don't like that, let's redo that, and, all of a sudden it's super expensive and it's not very good, or at least to their standards. They say so, and we're certainly not saying that. But
also worth mentioning, I have listened to their most recent album, 2019's Undress Your Madness, and with that album, I should point out that it was released under the Frontiers label. So
of course it was.
Why not? But yeah, I mean, you're glad to see these guys still out there doing it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's been a few years since they've released one, and who knows, maybe we could get one in 2025 if they're interested in doing some new stuff. Frontier seems to be pretty good about continuing to keep these groups out in the forefront with new content, so it would be really cool to see these guys put something new out in the next year. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he's involved in the new Avantasia as well, since he seems to be a perennial performer there.
I would say that's probably a pretty good bet.
Yeah.
We'll see health-wise if he's good to do that. But yeah, so interesting pick this week. Pretty Maids, letter P for glam bands on the list for this week. So we're on to 2007. Again, for those who are maybe just jumping into the podcast, my vault picks, we just started many weeks ago with the year 1969 with Chicago Transit Authority. And we went through year by year and picked an album that was either important to me or something that I really liked, or a band possibly that I really enjoyed, and have gone through year by year. We're going to stop when we get to 2010 and jump into another kind of gimmick, if you will, and maybe come back and do the 2010s at some point. But 2007, as Mike mentioned a little earlier, you're kind of getting into an era where I wasn't consuming as much media, music over here, because it was kind of going away as far as music videos, and especially for rock and metal. You still had channels putting out pop music videos, but much less so rock and metal. But so we're going to look through at some of the ones I spotlighted for 2007. We'll give you my pick, and then Mike will tell me what I've missed for 2007. Infinity on High from Fall Out Boy, one of the honorable mentions for 2007. I mean, even if you're not a fan of Fall Out Boy, you should always check their Wikipedia just to read the song titles, especially in this era. There are just a ton. Thanks for the Memories, probably the big track off of that album. It's a good one for sure. Definitely worth checking out. A good album from L'Arc en Ciel out of Japan. Kiss came out in 2007, included Seventh Heaven as the leading track there. Daybreak's Bell was included on that one. Link, another big track as well. So obviously those guys are everything they touch. That album got to number 1 on the Oricon chart. Included a 23-page photo book because, of course, it did. Those guys visually as important as the music to those guys, I think, at that time. But good stuff from them. Definitely worth checking out. A couple of bands that had kind of, hadn't really been releasing a lot of new albums. Both released new albums in 2007. And I thought both of them were solid. The Eagles' Long Road Out of Eden came out in 2007. And I bought this and I really enjoyed it. A lot of good tracks on here, including How Long, Busy Being Fabulous, Guilty of the Crime, Waiting in the Weeds, Fast Company, Do Something. It was a 2 CD set, so you also got Long Road Out of Eden on the second side, Last Good Time in Town, Business as Usual, It's Your World Now. It's just, those guys still getting it done all these years later and releasing a quality album. Definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of the Eagles. And Snakes and Arrows from Rush came out in 2007. Not a ton of hits off of that album, but it's just a really solid album. And the tour that supported that album ended up into a DVD, which was really well thought of. The live album, in fact, I believe comes out next year, 2008. So, obviously those guys are awesome. Great to see them, at that point still releasing music. Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace from Foo Fighters came out in 2007. The Pretender obviously was on that, and that was one of their biggest songs at the time, maybe still one of their biggest songs. Obviously great. 3 other albums that I really enjoyed, and I picked one for the vault, so the other 2 kind of get honorable mention. United Abominations came out in 2007. I really enjoyed this album. This is another one of those albums because I had kind of gotten into Metallica thanks to Mike at that point, that I was listening to these as they came out, which was kind of unusual for me. But Sleepwalker, Washington Is Next, Never Walk Alone, A Call to Arms, United Abominations, Years of War, Play for Blood, A Tout Le Monde, Set Me Free, America Stan, You're Dead. It's a good album, I think. Again, get your thoughts on it. Let's just do that now before I get to the last 2, since these are kind of worth more discussion. But as a expert in all things Megadeth, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, to me, this was kind of the true return to form for the band. I think System Has Failed was a fine album, but this was kind of them saying, okay, this is what Megadeth is. We finally figured it out again. Opening track like Sleepwalker is just so heavy, so good. I'm always a fan when Megadeth throws in kind of the political references. So obviously songs like Washington Is Next and United Abominations and America Stan, really cool. Play for Blood I could listen to anytime. Just really heavy, fun song. And rounding it out with Burnt Ice, just super heavy. Yeah, I probably top 3 Megadeth albums for me. Just really great.
Yeah, great stuff. Glenn Drover on that album. James Lomenzo, Sean Drover. Joining Dave Mustaine for that iteration of Megadeth. But definitely worth checking that album out. It's really good. 1 and 2 were pretty much neck and neck for me. I really like the Bad Religion album from 2007, New Maps of Hell. It's another one of those ones where I've listened to it all the way through. It's on my iPod. It shows up all the time. 52 seconds, which is 58 seconds long, which is always interesting to me, but opens the album. Heroes and Martyrs, Germs of Perfection, New Dark Ages is probably the song that most people would know. It ended up on one of the NHL games, I think, at that time. Requiem for Dissent, Before You Die, Honest Goodbye is just a really kind of a change of pace song for them. Definitely has a different vibe to it than a lot of their stuff, but I like it for that reason. Dearly Beloved, Grains of Wrath, Murder, Scrutiny, Prodigal Son, The Grand Delusion, Lost Pilgrim, Submission Complete, and then Fields of Mars to wrap it up. It's as is the case, a lot of short songs, but a couple over 3 minutes, which is a little unusual for them. But I overall, I think it's a really solid album.
Yeah, for sure. I think as far as back-to-back songs, you can't do much better than Honest Goodbye and Dearly Beloved.
Yeah.
I think those 2 are 2 of the standout tracks on the CD. And I do enjoy kind of boom, 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 really short songs to start it off. It kind of feels like New Dark Ages is the first real song, and the others are just snippets of something that they didn't finish, but they sound really good.
Yeah.
But this to me is right up there with Empire Strikes First as far as Bad Religion albums. Just great job.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely worth giving a listen. One other one I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about some of the honorable mentions. Yui released an album in Japan, Can't Buy My Love, which included Rolling Star, which was used for, I'm trying to remember which anime that was used in, Bleach it was used in. So big one there. But the album I ended up choosing for this week's pick was another Sonata Arctica album. It's Unia. this is just I just really like this album, and there's some of my favorite tracks of theirs on this. It starts out with In Black and White, which is a great way to start the album. Paid in Full, a great track, number 2, For the Sake of Revenge, It Won't Fade, Under Your Tree, which is, again, kind of a change of pace song. Caleb, The Vice, My Dream's But a Drop of Fuel for a Nightmare, The Harvest, The World's Forgotten, The Word's Forbidden, Fly with the Black Swan, and Good Enough is Good Enough. It's definitely different. It is, the Wikipedia page said it kind of characterized as dark and more aggressive for these guys. There were definitely some darker tones in here. It's definitely not the Sonata Arctica of 2 or 3 albums prior to this, but at the same time, it felt really, really well put together, that they had kind of found what this new sound was going to be for them, and they really kind of knocked it out of the park with this album. So, this is that era that I really kind of got to their stuff first, and then I kind of went back and got to some of their older stuff. But I think it's just a great front to backer from these guys. Your thoughts on this album?
Yeah, when I look at the tracks, I just remember how much I enjoy In Black and White.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me want to look at all the opening tracks from Sonata Arctica's studio albums and kind of how I would rank them. And that one's right up there with like Blank File and Web Allergy.
Those are great songs too.
You look at some of the, like, Abandon, Please, Brainwash, and Exploit, it's good too, of course. I think In Black and White's better than Misplaced from Reckoning Night.
Yeah.
You have Death Aura, which I consider kind of the first real song from Days of Grey. And then after that, like, Only the Broken Hearts Make You Beautiful, that one's fine. The Wolves Die Young, Closer to an Animal, Message from the Sun, and First in Line. I don't know if they've done a whole lot better than In Black and White since In Black and White as far as album openers go. But it's not like the super fast. It's more heavy than it is. It's not Blank File. It's not even like First in Line, where I feel like they tried to recreate some of that early album speed with their opening tracks. But I think they kind of went more mid-tempo on some of the songs, but it worked out for them. Paid in Full, Fly with the Black Swan, great song. Yeah, I almost need to go back and re-listen to some of these now, having heard where they've gone since. Because, I mean, the band's altered their sound so many times between this point and where we are now with their most recent album. So I'm curious how I'd feel about it in the context of all their albums at this point.
Yeah, I think trying to rank their albums would be very challenging because their sound changed so much from those early albums. It's almost 2 different bands, and I feel like this is where they really have hit their stride in this new sound that they're going to continue to master as they go forward. But it really felt like, not that they've abandoned their speed elements, but it really feels like this is like the groove that they were going for, and they really nail it.
Yeah, I think the next album is the really interesting one, because I feel like the Days of Grey just takes what they were doing to just the next level, where it's so different than Ecliptica or Silence. I wasn't sure about it at first, but it's grown on me to the point where it's one of my favorite albums of theirs.
I mean, the 2 hits, if you will, off of that album, The Last Amazing Grace and Flag in the Ground, are just so different from those guys. And obviously the whole album is, but at the same time, it's so well done that, if you had never heard the speed element, the speed era, I mean, you wouldn't even imagine it's the same band, but somehow they've really nailed it. And I think I even have on my iPod it's not an instrumental version, but it's like a orchestral version or something, a Flag in the Ground.
Yeah, because I think the collector's edition of the album had orchestral versions of the songs.
And it's like, hearing that with the flute at the beginning instead of, the guitar or whatever. But yeah,
I also think that was the first time, because like a song like Flag in the Ground, I think that was kind of when I first found out about their pre-Sonata Arctica stuff, because there's like an early version of that song. I can't remember let's see if it mentions here what it was called. Let's see. a song called Blackout. It has that same melody from the Friend Till the End demo when they were Tricky Beans, but it's cool because even then when their sound was evolving, they were still taking things from pre-Sonata Arctica days and reworking them to fit that more modern style. But
Yeah.
kind of going back to Unia, the album at hand, it's not Ecliptica, but I like the direction they were going because they couldn't just recreate the same album over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is just being able to evolve and do it in
Yeah.
a way that they were still really good and still at the top of their game. It wasn't a forced evolution against their will.
Their songs felt more thoughtful, maybe. Might be the best way to put it, but it almost maybe more progressive as opposed to just fast and melodic.
I can see that for sure. And we'll obviously continue to talk about them because we will get to Days of Grey before we get to the end of this run through the gimmicks. So definitely look forward to that in a couple of weeks. We'll talk more about that album for sure. But 2007, a lot of albums, a lot of good stuff all over the board. I know there's stuff that I missed. What did I miss from 2007?
Yeah, thankfully I was able to purge all of the entries that I'd originally typed up from my iPod when it was giving me incorrect years. So there won't be any albums here from the mid-90s
That's good.
that for some reason my iTunes and my iPod believed were from 2007. Kind of the standouts for me, Avenged Sevenfold self-titled came out. Really good follow-up to City of Evil. Tracks like A Critical Acclaim, Almost Easy, Afterlife, Little Piece of Heaven. Kind of on the metalcore side of things, we have Atreyu's Lead Sails, Paper Anchor. Just a little more commercially accessible sound this time around, but really good songs like Doomsday, Falling Down, Becoming the Bull. You had Dream Theater's Systematic Chaos. That run of albums kind of around Octavarium were just really good. Tracks like Forsaken, Constant Motion, The Dark Eternal Night, Prophets of War. Halloween released Gambling with the Devil, another solid mid-2000s release from them. Songs like Kill It, The Saints, As Long As I Fall, IME, Heaven Tells No Lies. One that I didn't catch initially, I ended up finding it out when I was just looking them up randomly, was band I mentioned earlier, Serenity. Their debut came out, Words Untold and Dreams Unlived. One of those groups that I discovered, I think, through either Pandora or Spotify years later. But really, really good power metal, kind of different than what you're typically used to listening to. Standout tracks like Circle of My Second Life, Engraved Within, Forever, From Where the Dark Is Born. Another band that sadly released their final album in that year, a band called Twilightning. Another kind of less popular power metal. They didn't really hit it super big, but they released their album Swine Lords in 2007, which was kind of a departure from their prior albums. Not as much power metal, a little more just melodic rock. Still really cool tracks like Isolation Shell, Swine Lord, Vice Jesus, The Gun. And finally, the second and last album from Velvet Revolver came out, Libertad. Tracks like Let It Roll, She Builds Quick Machines, The Last Fight, Can't You Get Out of My Head. Really cool super group, and unfortunately, no longer with us.
Yeah, it's a shame for sure. Just kind of wonder what would have been from those guys if
Scott Weiland was a tremendous frontman.
Oh my goodness! Like, you make the list of the people that you didn't get a chance to see and you wish you could have. Like, he would be right near the top of that list because just everything he touched was just music gold, and just a shame for sure. But definitely worth checking all of his stuff out from his music career. And with that said, it is time to bring this podcast to a close on another Sunday evening on the Nerdcast Empire. We really appreciate you joining us, whether you're joining us live on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire or on the VOD or on your favorite podcast network. We appreciate you for joining us. And again, stop by our Twitch, drop us a follow, share our posts. All that stuff is free, and it can really help us out a tremendous amount. If you enjoy what you hear, please do spread the word. Join our Discord. We've got the link in the first post of the chat this week. We really appreciate anybody who wants to come in and talk nerdy things with us on the Nerdcast Empire. Coming up Thursday night, another episode of Anime Thursdays, I should say. I believe we're going to be talking some of the best of 2024. We're also going to be doing a little bit of a holiday shopping guide. If you're into anime or video games and you're looking to pick something up, we're gonna give you some ideas for that coming up this Thursday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Then next Sunday, another episode of Music Weekly, the music of November the 29th, as we are ready to wrap up the month of November next week. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to the entire crew, obviously. Big thanks to Mike for putting all this together. And a big thanks to you for listening. That's going to wrap things up for the entire crew. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.